Hi, my name is Mike Brooks, and I have the privilege and honor to talk to you about Thursday of Holy Week. This is the week leading up to the death and resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection we celebrate as Easter. And so I get to talk about Thursday, which was the night that Jesus and his disciples held the Passover feast. They celebrated this feast. And what this feast is, if you don't know, this feast was instituted during the captivity of the Jews in Egypt. So during this time, God brought up Moses, and Moses was commissioned or elected to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. God wanted his people out of the land. He wanted to bring them back to Canaan. And Pharaoh refused. Pharaoh said, no, not going to do it. God said, if you don't do it, this is what I'm going to do. And then we have this succession of plagues. Now, this took time. It was a period of many months for this to occur and these things to play out and happen. And every time that God would institute a new plague, Pharaoh would apologize and say, no, I will let them go. I'm sorry. Please stop this thing. And God, being the graceful, merciful, loving God that he is, he would stop that plague in its tracks. And then Pharaoh would backpedal and say, nope, not going to let them go. We talked about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. So this would happen over and over and over again until the very last plague, where God says, I am going to kill all the firstborn of the houses of Egypt, of the slaves, of the livestock. I'm going to kill all the firstborn. You don't let my people go. And Pharaoh, with the hard heart, said, not going to happen. They're not going to go. So at this point, God institutes his Passover supper, which is to identify the household that belonged to God, and that if he saw, he would pass over this house. He wouldn't kill the firstborn of that house. And so what it was they were to take a lamb without blemish and bring it into the house on the 10th day, and on the 14th day at twilight, they were to sacrifice the lamb. They were to take the blood and put it on the lintel and the doorposts of their house so that he could see that, because it was on the exterior of the house. And they were to take and cook this lamb over open fire. It was supposed to be male. And they were to consume the whole thing. So if they had a small household, they would do it with a neighbor. If not, if they were large, then they would do it just with their family. And so they were required to eat the whole thing, the whole lamb. There's to be none left over come the morning. And if there was any left over, then they were to burn it over open fire. And the way they had to cook it was open fire as well. And they were to do this with their belt on, their sandals on, and their staff in hand. They had to do this in haste. And so this thing that they were to do so that God would pass over them, so that they would be excluded from this death that was going to happen, was not a secret. This wasn't a secret to anybody. This was known. People knew. There were God-fearers. There were plenty of people who were not Jewish by birth, right? Not the children of Israel, the children of Abraham, who did this. We see in the Exodus, we see the God-fearers going with the people, leaving the land. So this wasn't a secret, yet there were those who did not believe. There were those who would not do this thing. And because of it, the weeping, the crying in Egypt was so immense that there was nothing like it before and nothing like it after. People were devastated to their core because of the loss of life, because they didn't want to listen to God. So fast forward, now we're in Jesus' time with his disciples. Jesus is going to become that Passover lamb. So he's celebrating this feast with his disciples. At the beginning of this feast, he washes their feet. This is what was referred to as Monday, or this act of service. We call this Monday, Thursday. But he's setting them up for something. He's saying, if I do this for you, how much more then should you do it for one another? And so at the feast, Judas leaves at some point in time. And then at the end of the feast, Jesus takes all of his disciples and leaves. And on the way out of the city, he stops them and says, I give you a new commandment, and that is to love one another as I have loved you. And the point he's making to them is and he tells them it's so that everyone will know that you're mine, that you belong to me. And And it's not just outwardly people will know, but you will understand as well. When you love someone and they love you back, it changes the dynamic. And you know who you belong to when you love well and you are loved well. And so Jesus institutes this new commandment for them so that people will know that they're his, and so that they will know that they're his, because love is everything. You know, you can look at Corinthians, you can look at all kinds of different scriptures, you can look through the Psalms, and you can look through the Song of Solomon. There are so many points in the Bible where there is this huge emphasis on love. Love conquers all. And Jesus is telling them, love well. This isn't a feeling, right? This is an action. He's telling them to be intimate, be involved in each other's lives, meet each other's needs, be there, listen, walk alongside one another, really just be a part of each other's lives and listen and care for one another. So he says, like I've loved you. And of course, his love then is intensified in the action that's about to happen. So he takes his disciples, he goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, and the disciples sleep while he's praying, and he wakes them back up and says, please pray for me in this hour. Of course, they fall asleep again, and he's under so much just mental stress that it takes its toll physically on his body, and he begins to sweat droplets of blood. He's praying to the Father, Father, let this cup pass over me. Take this cup from me. He knows what's about to happen, and the significance isn't in his death. The significance is in the thing that is about to happen that has never, ever happened in human history or before that time. He is about to experience the separation of the Father for the first time ever. It's a triune God, three persons living in perfect living is a stretch of the word, but they're in perfect unity, perfect harmony. And now he's about to be separated from the Father. He's going to become sin, and the Father's going to turn his back on him. And Jesus knows the weight and the impact of this thing. And that is what is bringing him this huge, great distress. It's not the fact that he's going to go to the cross and die. It's the fact that he's going to be separated from the Father. The weight of that, I can't fathom the immenseness of that thing. So because of this, the Father sends, for the second time in Jesus' life, angels to minister to him. The first time was after his 3 temptations with Satan and at the 40 days in the fasting in the wilderness. At the end of that, because of his physical condition, the Father sent angels. And now because of this physical condition, which is brought on by something completely different, but it's a stress on his body, that the Father sends angels to minister to him again. And then what takes place next is a succession of pharisaical trials, lies and deception, and just all kind of terrible things. But please understand that Jesus, when he began his ministry, his point was to get to the cross. He contrived all of this. And again, that's a story for another time. We can get into understanding the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the things that needed to take place for Jesus to line up these events perfectly for this thing to happen. But he goes to the cross. He becomes the Passover lamb. These men, unwittingly, in the destruction and the death of Jesus, in the bloodletting of Jesus, make him the Passover lamb. Jerusalem is the center of Israel. Jerusalem, you always go up to Jerusalem no matter where you are. Jerusalem is where the house of God is, right? The doorway, the access point to the God of gods, right? The God, I'm sorry, not the God of gods, but the God Almighty, the King of Kings, the one you brought everything to, the one that you worship, the one that was the central part of your life. This was in Jerusalem. This was in the temple. And so what these men did was they took that blood of the Lamb. And they posted it on the doorpost and the lintel of the house of God. He became our Passover at that point. The entire world is under that house. So Jesus is our Passover Lamb. We take part in that now. We get to celebrate that Passover, knowing that Jesus paid the ultimate price and he was separated from the Father. But these wicked men unwittingly did that. They brought us into the fold, and we get to celebrate that. And so knowing what's coming, knowing about the resurrection, something we can be joyful for and we can celebrate. Thank you.